Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Take On the World 2020. I am Aaron Sampson, and you guys are here for my presentation, Genetics and Genesis, Rh Negative in the Scriptures. I'm super excited to be here right now and be a part of Take On the World this year. Big shout out and big thanks to Chris and Liz for bringing me into this and being able to have a platform to talk about this subject. It's crazy because 2 years ago in 2018, 2019, I was sitting in the seats watching some of the speakers that you guys are going to watch today. And here I am through the grace of God and through his inspiration to be here to have this presentation to get it put together for you guys. So big thanks to them. Big thanks to Rob Skiba and Josh Peck, Nathan Reynolds, Ian Chadrick. These are some of the people that inspired me to get to where I am today. For those of you who don't know who I am, but want a little bit of information about me, I am a part of a duo with my co-host Ian Chadrick on the Holy Hand Grenade YouTube channel. We have a show every Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern called TOTW20. On that show, we talk about spiritual warfare, modern topics, conspiracy theories. You also might know me from Omega Chronicles TV. That's my channel. I haven't had as much time to put a lot of work into that, but with this series as it progresses forward, I would like to start adding more content and getting more into that. So I'm getting kind of thrown into the fire, as so to speak. If you guys are interested in getting involved in what we do at SitRep, and you're a part of social media, you can find us at on Facebook at SitRep Resistance, and of course check out both of those YouTube channels. A little bit about the topic. This is such a fascinating topic, the genetics and Genesis. And we see, especially with the Rh negative, there are so many people that look at this from different perspectives. You have the paranormal community that looks at this. You have the scientific community that looks at this. You have the Christian community, the truther community. They all have their theories and their understandings. And the problem is their perspective that they're looking at is through rose-colored glasses. And I've tried to take a combination of all of them and try to look at this situation, including some science, including the Bible, including my experience in the paranormal, and kind of look at kind of everything that's involved, and have come to some pretty interesting conclusions. This is a very, very interesting topic, and how I got here is kind of an interesting topic in itself. But I have a lot of people around me who are Rh negative. And I've had more and more people, as I've talked about this, come and tell me, hey, I'm Rh negative, or my wife is Rh negative. Immediately close to me, I have my sister is Rh negative. My father-in-law is Rh negative. My best friend's wife is Rh negative. One of my other friends, for many years, he has 3 different mothers to his children. All of them are Rh negative. And the list goes on. I mean, more people, friends of mine, people that I've met through different communities, they're just, hey, I'm Rh negative, I'm Rh negative. And everybody's so fascinated by this topic because there's such shrouded mystery around the Rh negative. And I think there's reasons for that. And I think what we're going to see as we get through this is there's a specific overall reason why there's so much to this and why everybody's a little bit fascinated with it. I find it interesting, though, that there is such a fascination with it in America, because most people in America don't know their blood type. It is one of those kind of topics where people just kind of, I'll need it if I need it. And most of the people that I've talked to that do know their blood type either were served in military or they had Rh incompatibility issues with a pregnancy. But most other people, even myself included, I still don't know my blood type as the recording at the time of the recording of this video. But I hope to find that out soon. But I know that it is in my family line, considering my sister has it. But in Asian cultures, Korea, Japan, China itself, their view on the blood types can range from whether or not you get a job based on your blood type to whether or not somebody's going to date you based on your blood type. They know a lot more about the population in general knows a lot more about their blood type. And they have everything from diets that are based on blood type to comparatively what we have in the zodiac astrology on who they can date and how they're going to feel this day, all based solely on their blood type. And I find it so strange that they have the lowest Rh negative count in the world, but they all know their blood type. But here in America, it seems we have a much higher rate of Rh negative, but none of us seem to know it. So it's almost kind of like that there are some things that are being held back from us. Like there are people that are gatekeeping a lot of this genetic information. And I really hope that this video becomes a catalyst for people to start investigating more and start studying more, looking into the genetics and genesis, and start comparing to the science. Because what I have seen in the scientific community and true scientific community is that science proves the Bible. And I think we started out in the Middle Ages kind of hand in hand, the Bible and science, and they had great strives with stuff. But I believe that science was hijacked with modern science. And their whole goal was to stray as far away from God as possible and do everything they can to prove that God doesn't exist. But with the advent of modern technology and more people with accessibility to knowledge all over the earth, we're seeing more people being able to draw the conclusions and find correlations between things that we didn't know before when we were under Roman Catholicism, or, we just didn't have accessibility to all of this information. And now we're starting to see that more and more things of what science is saying is just on the outside fringe of what the Bible is saying. They just don't want to admit it. It always ends up being, we can't explain what it is, so it's aliens, or it's evolution, millions and millions and millions and millions of zeros, and eventually it's going to happen. So those are a couple of things we're going to talk about. I do want to preface this by saying I do not support or endorse any kind of racial supremacy or racial superiority. We're going to talk about genetics, and of course, when you start talking about genetics, there's always groups that are going to take one side or the other and point fingers and say that's the bad guy. And I don't support any of that. I think if you guys follow this all the way through to the end of the presentation, you're going to understand why. I think we're on a lot more equal ground than what we think we are. In a lot of ways, but I don't. We saw a lot with Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophy Society moving on into Nazi Germany and the occultic Nazis, and how they treated people that weren't like them because they were trying to get to a specific type of person. That was their genetics. It was all tied to that. And then you also see in modern times, like black Israelites saying that white people are the devil, and they're the Nephilim bloodline and stuff. So I don't support any of that. I think, like I said, when we get towards the end of this, you're going to have a better understanding. But I do have to say, I am not a doctor or have a PhD. I'm about as much as a virologist or a geneticist as Rob Skiba's an astronaut. But with that being said, though, in both of these circumstances, God gave us the inspiration, made us a sponge, gave us the information, and gave us the ability through the Holy Spirit to inspire us to put these pieces together, and then gave us the platform to be able to get it out there. So with where I'm at right now, I can only hope that this becomes a catalyst, much like Flat Earth, where just a few people started with some great information, and then it was picked up by a groundswell of people, and they all contributed, and it became something much bigger than what it was originally. I hope that this is a catalyst, and this does the same thing, because there's such great information, and it's such a fascinating topic, and I think a lot of people are going to be interested in what's going on in this presentation, while others will have their own information, have contributions, and may even seek out to understand more about their own genetics, their own blood, and start seeing correlations with other people and circumstances and things like that we can start putting more together. So with that being said, the best way to do this is we're going to have to take blood 101, and I have a video that's kind of going to give us a quick understanding of what the ABO blood type is and what Rh negative factor is, the rhesus factor in the blood. And once we get through that, we're going to start getting into the 4 theories I'm going to introduce today. So let's get the video going.
Our blood comes in a few different varieties. Our red blood cells contain a protein called hemoglobin that binds to oxygen, allowing the cells to transport it throughout the body. But they also have another kind of complex protein on the outside of the cell membrane. These proteins, known as antigens, communicate with white blood cells, immune cells that protect against infection. Antigens serve as identifying markers, allowing the immune system to recognize your body's own cells without attacking them as foreign bodies. The two main kinds of antigens, A and B, determine your blood type. But how do we get 4 blood types from only 2 antigens? Well, the antigens are coded for by 3 different alleles, varieties of a particular gene. While the A and B alleles code for A and B antigens, the O allele codes for neither. And because we inherit 1 copy of each gene from each parent, every individual has 2 alleles determining blood type. When these happen to be different, one overrides the other, depending on their relative dominance. For blood types, the A and B alleles are both dominant, while O is recessive. So A and A gives you type A blood, while B and B gives you type B. If you inherit one of each, the resulting codominance will produce both A and B antigens, which is type AB. The O allele is recessive, so either of the others will override it when they're paired, resulting in either type A or type B. But if you happen to inherit 2 O's, instructions will be expressed that make blood cells without the A or the B antigen. Because of these interactions, knowing both parents' blood types lets us predict the relative probability of their children's blood types. Why do blood types matter? For blood transfusions, finding the correct one is a matter of life and death. If someone with type A blood is given type B blood, or vice versa, their antibodies will reject the foreign antigens and attack them, potentially causing the transfused blood to clot. But because people with type AB blood produce both A and B antigens, they don't make antibodies against them, so they will recognize either as safe, making them universal recipients. On the other hand, people with blood type O do not produce either antigen, which makes them universal donors, but will cause their immune system to make antibodies that reject any other blood type. Unfortunately, matching donors and recipients is a bit more complicated due to additional antigen systems, particularly Rh factor, named after the rhesus monkeys in which it was first isolated. Rh plus or Rh minus refers to the presence or absence of the D antigen of the Rh blood group system. And in addition to impeding some blood transfusions, it can cause severe complications in pregnancy. If an Rh negative mother is carrying an Rh positive child, her body will produce Rh antibodies that may cross the placenta and attack the fetus, a condition known as hemolytic disease of the newborn. Some cultures believe blood type to be associated with personality, though this is not supported by science. And though the proportions of different blood types vary between human populations, scientists aren't sure why they evolved, perhaps as protection against blood-borne diseases, or due to random genetic drift.
All right, hopefully all of you guys are still with me. I try to make that as entertaining as possible, speed it up a little bit, and made it sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks. Let's recap just a little bit. So we have 4 main blood types, A, B, AB, and O. And on the surface of those blood cells are what we call antigens. That's where you get your actual blood type from, whether you have the antigens or don't. Those antigens cause immunoglobulin responses inside of the white blood cells, which is what triggers your immune response to things that aren't similar to your cells. So it's how your body recognizes your cells versus others. The Rh negative, or the D factor, is a third kind of calculated Rh factor. There are many other proteins that are on the surface, but the ABO and the Rh negative are the only primary ones at this point in time that, for most people, can be an effect, between life or death in transfusions. The difference between the Rh negative and the ABO is the Rh negative is not a naturally forming antibody. As with the ABO, it can form in the first year of life for a child. The Rh negative will not create an immune response unless the body is exposed to Rh positive blood. So it's a very interesting and kind of part of the reason why genetically this is an odd and strange occurrence inside of the body, because it is something that is, especially inside the mother's womb, where your body is attacking something that your body has already naturally created. But we'll look into that a little bit more. What we're going to move into is the first of 4 of the theories that are associated with Rh negative. 2 of them are from the scientific community. One of them is already pretty well known or common in the truther Christian movement. The 4th one is kind of my compilation of a lot of information that I found, and I can't wait to get to that point. But what I've always understood in a debate or something, a topic where there is opposition or roadblocks, is it's best to confront those topics first and then go on to the topic at hand, the topic that you're trying to talk about. So we get those kind of side arguments out of the way first. So the first one I'd like to talk about is evolution. Evolution, when it comes to Rh negative, has a lot of flaws. They really have a hard time explaining Rh negative, but they kind of write it off with the idea that if you add enough zeros through millions and millions and millions of years, at some point in our paleo history, the Cro-Magnon man split off into another group, and they had a genetic mutation that caused the Rh negative. One of the main problems I have with that is the theory of Darwinism, which most of evolution is founded on, is survival of the fittest. And when you have a genetic system that is killing its own offspring within no matter how many millions and millions of years, especially the more millions and millions of years you add to that whole bloodline would eventually be weeded out. There would be no more, because they're not producing the offspring at the rate of the death and birth rates are uneven, because you're going to have more people dying. You're not going to be having as many children. Eventually that bloodline would have seen itself come to its fruition. So, but again, since I'm not a doctor, there is a doctor who I think will kind of settle this argument about the millions and millions and millions and millions of years. His name's Dr. Robert Carter.
But about 1,600 years later, something happened. The whole world population was reduced to 8 people at the time of Noah's flood. Now, if you just add up the ages given to us in the Bible, Noah was born about 1,056 years after creation, or Anno Mundi, year of the world. The Bible says in Genesis 7, Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth. So Noah's flood was about 1600 a.m. I rounded off.
Yeah.
So the question we have is, how many people could have been on the earth after 1,600 years? A friend and I, we actually published this in our Journal of Creation a couple of years ago. We wrote a massive computer program. It's a population modeling program. We threw all those parameters in there, including the rate of twins being born and whether or not there's polygamy in the society. And all those things have a little effect. And each of these bars is the result of 100 computer runs. That's the average. Now, depending on how far apart the children are and how young the women start having children, we showed that some population can go extinct.
Yeah.
And some populations can grow at up to 8%. Now, in 8% population growth, the population doubles every 9 years.
Oh, okay.
So that's a
Just
massive
8%.
population. So now, how fast did it grow? I don't know. But somewhere in that range. Even with slow growth, slow-growing populations, we got thousands of people in just a couple of hundred years after creation. Now, these 3 curves, this is how old the woman is when they start having children. So if they wait until they're 80 years old, so Adam and Eve's first daughter has to be 80 years old before she has her first child, even with that delay, we've got about 8,000 people after about 400 years.
Huh.
So how many people at the flood? My best guess would be hundreds to thousands of people at the flood. And then Noah's family was picked from that group.
All right.
Genesis chapter 9 gives us another statement about genetics. The sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These 3 were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Well, the Bible says there that all people on earth came from 3 couples, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 3 sons. That's a profound statement. Is that possible just 4,500 years ago? Actually, yeah. But there's one more thing that happens with human genetics in the Bible. And that's the Tower of Babel event, where a couple of generations after the flood, the people are already acting wickedly. So the Lord dispersed them from there, that's Babel, over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. When did that happen? That's a great question. Well, in Genesis chapter 10, it says to Eber, descendant of Shem. To Eber were born 2 sons. The name one was Peleg. For in his day the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Now, people debate over what this division means. Some people say that was continental drift. No. Some people say, oh no, that was the land flooded, and therefore people got divided. I don't think so. The context here is the Tower of Babel.
Okay.
So the context of the Tower of Babel happened during the life of Peleg. And adding up the ages from Shem to Eber to Peleg, if you add up all these ages, you get between 101, and that's when Peleg was born about, nominally, and 340 years, that's when he died. That's when the Tower of Babel should have happened. A couple of centuries after the flood.
Okay.
Now, how many people could have been alive then? Well, remember that last slide? The slide a couple slides ago when I showed those curves going upwards? You could easily have had thousands of people at the Tower of Babel. Looking at the potential growth rate of human populations, we can actually ask the question, how come there are only 7 billion people?
Yeah. Oh.
And my answer is, most people ever born died of starvation, disease, or warfare.
Wow.
Because the population could have grown much, much, much faster than it actually did. There's another interesting genetic thing, and that is the Exodus. So the Bible says that 70 people went to Egypt. But Exodus 12 says that about 600,000 fighting males left Egypt. And if you have 600,000 fighting age men, your population, you have to have about the same number of women plus old people plus young people. The population, some people estimate, somewhere around 2.7 million Hebrews left Egypt. Wow. Can you go from 70 to 2.7 million in 480 years?
Can you?
What do you think?
I think we did.
I think we did, but that's a big difference, isn't it?
Sure is.
Oh, okay, well, let's look at this. First of all, in that same computer model, we started with 70 people, and in this case, we're saying the children are 1 year apart, 2 year apart, 3, 4, or 5 years apart on average. Not that every woman always had a child every 1 year, but at the minimum, that was our setting for our model. And what we showed then over 480 years, every single model we ran had more than our required 2.7 million people. So it's easy to get that number of Hebrews in 480 years, starting from 70 people.
Very doable.
Now, granted, that's ridiculous. Right? These numbers, that's not a number, that's not possible. But this is possible. The land can't hold that many people, it can hold that many, and you can get that big in that much time. But some scholars believe that the sojourn was only 215 years long. Fine. Well, we ran that model also. And after 215 years, a number of our computer models had more than that 2.7 million people that are required. And the answer is all you have to do is have children spaced very closely together. That's very interesting stuff. And it's just really fun to apply computer models to genetics and biblical history just to see what we could do. Now, I stole this from a government website, and it's their fault, it's not the best picture in the world, but they're saying here that this is the population size over time, going all the way back to, they believe, way before the Bible says the world was created. But essentially, there's about 1 million people alive across the world for tens of thousands of years, and all of a sudden, somebody invents farming. And that means that extra population can be handled because there's more food. And all of a sudden, the population does that, and we have 7 billion people today.
So food is, you can see how food is integral to living. So it's basically survival mode for thousands of years.
Yeah, but did this really exist?
No.
And how come the people with the same genes back here, who were just as smart as people here, they didn't think of planting something in the ground and harvesting it the next year? So this is really magic back here.
Right.
Taking that thought, I applied that to a biblical idea where this is the flood, this is today. And starting from those 6 people, all you have to do is double the number of people, every 156 years. And you arrive at 7 billion people after 4,500 years. That's a growth rate of 0.4%. Remember, so some of my models had 8% growth rate. Now, it's ridiculous. Populations don't grow that fast, but they could, theoretically. But that is incredibly slow. And in fact, just about any model that has any growth at all, you can get this many people in those many years. So the human population size actually is a biblical human population size. If evolution was true and we existed for so many thousands of years before that, there should be trillions of people. Not that it's possible.
Yeah.
Or someone should have invented farming earlier than that. or another way to ask it is this. If 1 million people live for about 1 million years, where are the trillions of bodies?
That's a really good question.
They don't exist.
There's no bones down there.
Yeah, there are some ancient bones we found, great, but those are post-flood people.
Right.
There should be millions upon millions of cemeteries, old villages, and remains of people, and we don't find them. I believe it's because they didn't exist. Now, looking at the Adam and Eve story, we can make some predictions. First, if we only started with 2 people, all the people today should have a low genetic diversity. If we started with millions of people, you can have a lot of genes floating around in a population of 1 million strong. But if you only started with 2 people, that restricts the diversity today. If the Bible's correct and Adam really is our ancestor, there should only be 1 male ancestor of humanity. And the mitochondrial DNA, the mtDNA, that's a little piece of DNA that's only inherited from your mother. All people get it from their mother. Well, that means we can build a family tree of all the females in the world, and there should only be 1 female ancestor of everyone on earth today. If evolution is true, that shouldn't be true, and none of those have to be true. But also, most genes should come in 2 versions, because Eve was taken from Adam. She probably got Adam's genome, except for the Y chromosome. But Adam only has 2 copies of each gene, so you can only have 2 versions of each gene. Turns out, this is exactly what we have found in modern human genetics.
Huh. Wow.
I mean, what's the chance of the Bible being made up and the biblical story actually mirrors what we actually see in human genetics today?
That's amazing.
Totally amazing.
Absolutely.
We look at Noah's flood. Noah's flood tells all people should be closely related. It tells us there should only be a few mitochondrial DNA lines. That's Shem, Ham, and Japheth's wives.
Right.
And only 1 Y chromosome, because it's only Noah. His 3 sons would have inherited his Y chromosome. Any other Y chromosome diversity before the flood is gone. And we should have evidence of rapid population growth. We saw that a minute ago. Turns out that this is exactly what we find in modern genetics. This is the Noah's flood story also.
1 Y and only a few of the lady's genes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Didn't have to be true. And in the Tower of Babel account, we have discovered a single dispersal of all people in the relatively recent past, traveling in small people groups into uninhabited territory through the Middle East. They call it the Out of Africa story. But these are all biblical predictions right here.
They think it's a little further south in Africa. You think it's a little further north.
The starting point is a little different.
Yeah.
The same pattern is predicted
exactly.
by both sides.
And they're totally agreeing with you on that.
Yes, except they want it here as far as the starting point goes.
Right.
But the Bible says this.
Yes.
Now, interestingly, I'm sure you've had people on your show talking about the biblical Ice Age. Mm-hmm. During that Ice Age, which was approximately the same time as the Tower of Babel, you could have walked from here to Ireland on dry ground.
Sure.
You could have walked to Tasmania.
Yeah.
And the only deep water part you have to cross is a place between these 2 little islands, Bali and Lombok, and you can see one island from the other. It's right there. It's not, and you could have walked all the way down to here on dry ground at that one point in history, not any other point in history.
It all adds up.
It does. If we look at the evolutionary Out of Africa story, that's a Tower of Babel story right there.
Okay.
Now, they want to push the origin way down deep in here, but that's actually bad. The graphic artist put it there. It should be up here because this is the greatest amount of diversity. But they put it there because they can't put it there. They could not put it there. And if we just look at the history of man and compare it to the evolutionary timeline and the biblical timeline, So they believe that about 1 million Homo erectuses lived in Africa and Asia for about 1 million years. And then something happened. Our population was reduced to, they say, an effective population size of about 10,000 people. That's called extinction. And there's about that many cheetahs in Africa today, and all the population biologists think they're going to go extinct, or a lot of them. They're worried about cheetahs. Well, somehow, during this catastrophic event, modern humans evolved. And then we spread out of Africa and covered the world. Well, the biblical timeline says we started with Adam and Eve a few thousand years ago, went to some unknown number before the flood, were reduced to 8 souls during Noah's flood, and then a couple hundred years later, we hit the Tower of Babel event when we spread out across the world.
All right, so that was some great information. And you kind of see where we're coming from the genetic aspect of how the impossibility of millions and millions and millions and millions of years could create the Rh negative factor when we don't have that in our timeline. Our genetics coincide with exactly what the biblical timeline says. Especially when it comes to the Rh negative, you're not going to see this genetic diversity that they're talking about over millions and millions and millions of years. While there is thousands and thousands, even up to millions of genetic mutations that happen, most of it is in your skin cells. And you see that passed down generationally, but on a genetic level, on our main genetics, you will see that we share such common, like the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome sharing between males. The humans, we only have such a limited amount of shared genetics that it is impossible for millions and millions and millions and millions of years. And I think when we look at the genetics, just like Dr. Robert Carter said, you see exactly what we were told in the biblical timeline. So this is kind of the first thing. Some of the other points that he pointed out that I really liked, there would be a lot much more genetic diversity. The Rh negative, like we talked about, would have phased itself out. You would not have seen over millions and millions and millions of years an offshoot of genetics that was perpetually killing its own offspring would have died out. You would not see what science says is 15% of the population millions and millions of years after the fact still being in the populace. That should have died out a long time ago. There's nothing, as the theory of Darwin would have said, that makes that line superior in its reproductive capabilities and its strength and anything like that. So it's something that we would actually see the opposite of, and we would not see the existence of that any longer. Or if we did, it would be primarily in secluded populations. There would be very, very, very little of it. And what we see today is the exact opposite of that. If we follow the line of evolution, then the biblical creation would not be true. And I think we see the opposite of that in genetics. And then he made a point of the trillions of dead bodies. If millions of people were alive for millions of years, we would have seen a lot more evidence of those people being alive. And we, like you said, we just don't see that. So this is kind of some of the things I want to point out about the evolutionary theory that does not coincide with the understanding of Rh negative. So if science can't explain it this way, what does science try to explain it like? And so that goes into our next theory. Because science can't explain it through evolution, through the theory of Darwinism, they have kind of moved to the idea of aliens. And so that's what we're going to move into next. And I'm going to start that off with a video from our favorite alien theorists, Ancient Aliens.
Located between the border of Spain and France is the Pyrenees mountain range. The people that occupy this isolated region are known as the Basque, and they have long confounded anthropologists and historians. The language spoken by the enclave is not related to any other in that part of the world. And the population also has the highest concentration of Rh negative blood type in the world.
Up to 35% of Basque people have Rh negative blood. And Rh negative blood is one of the most unusual blood types. And it's the one blood type that is least likely to mutate or interact with other blood types.
Human blood types are grouped into 4 distinct designations: that include O, A, B, and AB. Additionally, there is another variance between blood types known as the Rh factor, or rhesus factor, which is a measure of rhesus-based antigens in the blood.
The name comes from a monkey from India and other parts of Asia, which is the rhesus macaque. And this monkey was used in experiments looking at blood transfusions. How blood was received from recipients varied. And it was discovered that the rhesus factor could be positive or negative. Most humans in the world are rhesus positive.
%85 of humans in the world are Rh positive and have no issues receiving blood from positive or negative donors. But for the Rh negative population, receiving Rh positive blood may be fatal, as the body will try to destroy the foreign antigens. And for women that are Rh negative, mating with an Rh positive partner could be detrimental to the fetus.
If a rhesus positive and a rhesus negative parents were to have an offspring, there is a potential danger to the offspring because these two blood types can't interbreed, basically. Medical intervention is needed. It's why, actually, in the past, people had to have a blood test before they were allowed to get married.
The very fact that an Rh negative mother, her body would actually try to kill an Rh positive baby generates bizarre scenarios. How on earth could this happen? It suggests somewhere in our lineage that the Rh negatives and the Rh positives are perceived as being profoundly different. And also, studies of Rh negatives suggest that they have lower than normal blood pressure, lower than normal pulse. In a number of cases, they have an extra vertebra in their back.
Rh negative is very rare. Most of the world didn't have it until colonization started in the 15th century. Rh negative didn't exist in the Americas, it didn't exist in Southern Africa, it didn't exist in Asia. It was only in Europe, so it spread out from there. Out of Africa, that theory has it that all human beings originated in Africa, Southern Africa, Sub-Sahara. They're all Rh positive. They don't have any Rh negative. Where did Rh negative evolve then?
15% of the humans have Rh negative blood. 15%. And scientists have no idea where it came from. What they do believe is that if you have that, you may have been evolved from a different kind of species on this planet. Now, was that species put here, genetically altered, or was it just a natural formation of the planet in its evolutionary stage? Who knows? But the fact is that Rh negative people, and again, there's 15% of them on this planet, may have come from outside sources. So, like, we don't really know, so it must be aliens. Seems to be the way that they always go with some of these topics. If it's not, it doesn't fit in the evolutionary theory, then it's got to be aliens. And as I'm sure most of you guys who are watching, if you're watching on Robbie Davidson's Celebration Truth, his YouTube channel, then I think most of you have been under the understanding of biblical cosmology, or what we know as an enclosed cosmology. And there's no real room for aliens. So if it doesn't fit, if the Rh negative doesn't fit in the millions and millions and millions and millions theory, and it doesn't fit in Darwinism's theory of survival of the fittest, and there's not really a possibility for aliens in this understanding. So what is this? It must come from someplace else. So I think that leads into our next topic, which I think a lot of Christians have come to the understanding of, and a lot of truthers have come to the understanding. It is a biblical story known as the fallen angels we see in Genesis 6. It's a very, very interesting topic. It's one of those things that I think a lot of people years ago, we didn't quite understand it, and we just kind of glossed over it when we were reading Genesis. It doesn't fit into, the kind of kids' Bible stories. But, in the same aspect, we saw David and Goliath, and we're told over and over and over again that Goliath was a giant. But we, just kind of brushed that over. I really do believe in our recent time here that this has been a kind of an awakening for people to have this kind of understanding that has been kind of hidden from Christians for a long time, is this understanding of the fallen angels and the giants in our history. And with the advent of modern technology, again, this is something that has came out and so many people have contributed to. So this is something that is an awesome topic, but to understand it for those that don't have a comprehension of this, we have to go and look at Genesis 6. When man became to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any that they chose. The Lord said, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. When the sons of God came into the daughters of man, they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." So there's a lot packed into this. Just in the beginning, when it talks about the sons of God, there's a term in Hebrew known as the B'nai Elohim, which means a direct creation of God. So there is some side theories that has kind of been passed around in Christianity and through seminary schools, that this is the Seth line, the Sethite line, that the Seth had males who mated with the son or the daughters of Adam, and they created this line. So somehow they just regular people created this Nephilim line. But I think in the text that we see here, the text we find later on in the Bible itself, and what we see in some extra biblical texts like Joshua, Jubilees, the Book of Enoch, these all kind of have some kind of hint to what we see in this biblical narrative. So as we continue on, there's an interesting kind of little quote in there that the Lord says, "My spirit shall not be in man forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be limited to 120 years." That's really interesting when we understand that up to that point, in the lineage of Adam, they were living for a lot longer, and they hit this point about the time of Jared, which is one of the great-grandchildren of Adam. His name meant they came down, or they shall come down, and it I think is denoting that the point in which at his birth is when the same time when these fallen angels came down to men. These fallen angels were known as a watcher class of angels in the Book of Enoch, and we see this kind of narrative in Job, where the adversary is traveling to and from earth, kind of communicating with God. I think that's what this watcher class of angels was they were the ones that were kind of observing what was happening on the earth. And this is something in later videos in my Genetics and Genesis, I'm going to continue on with this because it ties into a lot of other things. But for the sake of this video, we're going to continue just to talk about the Nephilim. But the Nephilim is another term for Gibborim, it says in some texts, which means giants. So these were the offspring of the Nephilim at the time. So it says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also after. So when we're talking about this, we have an understanding that during the time of Jared, the fallen angels came down and they mated with women. They created an offspring that was different from the mankind that was there. And their children were known as the mighty men of old, or men of renown. And I think we see this in a lot of pagan history through mythology. We see it in Greco-Roman history, North mythology. You see it in Greek mythology. I mean, there's a ton of these different stories of where the gods came down and they mated with women and created demigods. And we see this also in the story of Genesis and also in the book of Enoch. So it's interesting. There are so many people that have come out with information on this. This has been peeled kind of wide open here recently. I believe, honestly, it is a revelation for the end times because it exposes so much of the biblical Torah that we didn't understand before. So this leading up to the time of Noah, which is kind of where I like the starting point, because whatever happened up to Adam, where we can kind of argue and debate, there's a lot of plot holes. And that's kind of what I have a problem with this as being the primary theory. Because there's so many different ways that you can look at the origins of this. There are some people that have speculated what's called the serpent seed theory, which that the serpent in the garden is the one that beguiled Eve, and she had a pregnancy that had one child that was from Adam and one that was from the serpent. And this is what they say started the Nephilim line. We get in Enoch that these were the fallen angels. There's a lot of ways that you can look at this, and then people arguing the Sethite theory. That's why you can argue it a bunch of different ways, but ultimately where it comes to the important aspect of it is when it gets to Noah. Noah said that he's pure in his generations, and that he's basically, God is going to wipe out the earth of everything that happened before. And all that's going to make it over to the other side is Noah, his wife, Nama, and their 3 sons and their 3 daughters. So when we get to that point, the text right here says that they were on the earth in those days and also after. So where did they come on the other side of the flood? Now, there are some speculations, again, more plot holes that leaves stuff wide open for speculation, that there's what's called the second incursion, where angels came down again. But I think biblically that, for the most part, has been debunked because there are passages later on in the text that says that the angels were so kind of shook by the punishment of the fallen watchers that none of them would ever choose to do that again, basically. Because in Enoch, it describes how the watchers who fell and mated with women, they were locked away and punished in Tartarus. But we get to Noah and his descendants, and on the other side of the flood, there's an interesting story that happens that I think can explain the Nephilim on the other side of the flood. And I think this we'll see later, because I'm going to get into a lot of this really quickly to cover this, because this has been talked over so many different things, or so many different ways, and there's so much information out there. You can find boatloads of it. Even quite a few of the people who are going to be speaking during this have full books and video series, like Rob Skiba, Nathan Reynolds, Josh Peck. They have all kind of covered this Nephilim topic. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I do want to cover it and say that there is some validity to this understanding. But let's touch on where I see the giants coming to the other side of the flood, and that's through the genetic line of Noah's sons' wives. They were not genetically pure. They were from the descendants of whatever was happening on the other side of the flood. So when God says that Noah's line was pure, it did not mean that his daughter-in-laws were. They were the boys were kind of told to go out and get wives before the flood and carry them over to the other side. So I've looked at this on the other side from many different ways. How in the epigenetics, how we can find a lot of different things that are like triggers and switches, that maybe sin was kind of the trigger that re-emerged this Nephilim gene that was already inside of the genetics. And that has some validity to it, but it's not fully fleshed out. One of the things that we do notice is a story about Shem, Ham, and Japheth on the other side of the flood, getting off the boat, and we'll go to that right now. It says the sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then it's kind of notated here that Ham was the father of Canaan, kind of inserted into there. So that's important. These 3 were the sons of Noah, and from these people the whole earth was dispersed. Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, again marking this name, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backwards, and they did not see the father's nakedness. When Noah woke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he cursed Canaan. So this is an interesting story, the way this kind of folds out. So when you just kind of glance over this without understanding all of this text, all of the Genesis text, and all of the original Torah was created from Moses. And so what Moses uses in language later on in the text, we always go off of Scripture, off of the rule of first use. And there is, in the law of Moses, there is a whole covenant part that says that you shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your son's daughter. It gives this very laid out plan about an incestual relationship. It's commanded. And we will show kind of in my later part of this video there, and I went through this time and time again through the genetics. There was never an instance that was ordained and blessed by God of where one of the children down Adam's line married a brother or sister or a mother or father, and there wasn't some kind of genetic curse. So it's interesting to note that they're talking about uncovering the nakedness of your father, and then you see Ham doing something where Ham doesn't genetically get cursed, but it goes down to his son's line, Canaan, which Canaan becomes the patriarchal ancestor of the Canaanites, which were known as giants all throughout later text in Genesis. So something happened with whatever he did, which the understanding of uncovering the nakedness of your father would be some kind of relationship with his mother. Now, I have heard and seen some oral tradition that not only did Noah's sons, Shem and Japheth, go and find wives, but Noah also had lost his first wife, and he found another wife who had a son, Ham. Now, I'm still finding out all of the validity of this, but this is another theory in this, and that they had already had this relationship, and then that's why Canaan is noted in this on the other side of the flood. But for whatever reason, it was an ongoing thing, and this awoken Noah to what was happening, and he cursed Canaan's line. There's a lot that you can kind of speculate in this information. So again, this is why I have a lot of problems with this being tied to the Rh negative line, because it just doesn't fit right all the way. Now, there is the whole line of the giants, but I think we see that carry on, and we will see that line carry on for generations. But I don't quite see the tie-ins for the Rh negative. It's an assumption, and it's a good one, and it does have its possibilities. As we keep going, that we see this again, the same kind of situation with Lot and his two daughters. Just outside of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction, Lot and his two daughters flee after his wife's turned to a pillar of salt, and they flee into the mountains thinking the entire world's being destroyed. And his daughters are kind of lamenting because they didn't get the opportunity to get married, and so they're, what are we going to do? We've never had offspring, blah, blah, blah. So they conspire to get Lot drunk, and then both of them sleep with him. And we see this in Genesis 19:32 through 38. It says, "Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie down with him, that we may preserve our offspring from our father." So that they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Next day, the firstborn said to the younger, "Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine also tonight. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve our offspring from our father." So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son called Ben Ammah, and he is the father of the Ammonites to this day. Genesis 19:32 through 38. So again, we see this reverse flow of the genetics. Like God had kind of established this, that these generations would intermingle through a downward flow. But when it goes the opposite way, we see the Moabites and the Amorites, two more giant clans come out of this. So I think this is the resurgence that we see of these tribes on the other side of the flood. It's interesting, you understand, like as you go through more of the text, all the way up to the time of David. I mean, through the when they were in the wilderness and they're trying to take back the land, all of this, they're fighting these ites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Jebusites. These were all giant clans that stemmed over thousands of years from these families. So you get all the way to the point of David, where David goes and takes on Goliath, which I'm sure is a familiar story that all of us are aware of. And then he also tracks down his brothers, and that's a story in 2 Samuel. I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but it just kind of gives a description. It's 2 Samuel 21:15 through 22. It gives a description of these other giants they were kind of taking up. It's kind of like the last giants of the land. But it does give a description where it says that down here in 20, it says, "And there was a war against Gath. There was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. And he was also descended from the giants." So all the way up to the time of David, I mean, we have this kind of history of these giants. The king of Og Bashan. I mean, there are so many of these instances that popped up. Anytime you saw the Hittites or the Amorites or the Jebusites or the Rephites, these were all like resurgence on the other side of the flood. But does it describe the Rh negative? I don't necessarily think so. I think there are some genetic traits which we can see because we see it carried down into even modern giants, which I'll show some pictures here. These are some modern depictions as well as some elongated skulls, even all the way back, some pictures all the way back to Egypt. We see that all throughout our history, all the way up into the early 1900s, there were even news articles in Chicago and New York and San Francisco, coastal cities where primarily you would have thought that if you were going to build a community or a settlement or something like that, that's where you would kind of want to be. You would want to be by a lake, river, and you see the Serpent Mounts of Ohio on the Ohio River. You see in Chicago by the Great Lakes, in New York by the water there. There were these clusters when they were building our cities. They found these clusters of 8-foot tall people, even here in America. The Indians here had many stories about Indians, the giants interacting with the Indians here. So there were tons and tons of different stories. I've even heard that the idea that they put their hand up and said "how" was just so they could see if the giants had 6 fingers. But yeah, we see all the way up into modern time, and I think what we're seeing of that, because I think the majority of the giants didn't last too much further down those genetic lines. They were eventually hunted down and killed because they were cannibalistic. But what we see in modern times is kind of remnant of that genetic seed still being carried through. Because understanding this whole genetic aspect is to understand there are dominant and recessive traits. And as you go down through the generations, those traits can pop up. Things like blue eyes, blonde hair, dark skin, dark hair, how tall you are, genetic dysfunctions. They can skip generations. They can skip multiple generations. But we see biblically there are so many times when it's talked about generations this, generations that, generational curses. When you're talking to a people that had no fundamental understanding of genetics or epigenetics, this is kind of how they looked at it. It was important to God to track the generations, to understand not to do certain things, not to eat certain things, not to marry certain groups, or bad things happened. And I think we're coming to the other side and the understanding that this was kind of the result of these decisions. Now, I don't 100% agree that this is the only way we see the Rh negative bloodline. I think it is quite a possibility that this is one of the 2 possibilities for Rh negative bloodline. But that leads me into the fourth and final theory. I don't want to spoil too much right now, but there will be a part 2. So we're getting close. We're getting close to the end of the time. I will kind of give you a little bit of a taste. We're going to be talking about the genetic line from Adam to Jesus. So make sure you guys are keeping an eye on the calendar. Part 2 of this will be coming, and this will be my coverage and the kind of the end all of this. And my biggest study is genetics and Genesis, Rh negative in the scriptures, the line of the Messiah. So make sure you guys tune in, enjoy the other speakers, and we hope to see you guys soon. You guys have a blessed day. Enjoy the rest of Take on the World, and don't forget, look for part 2. It's coming.